we're starting all the way back at the very beginning, which is when film began. Film was a medium to show motion, and what they used was a celluloid back, which is kind of a rubbery material, and then they used a nitrate acetate layer of chemical that was light resistant. Light would hit it, and it would start to form images on the thing, and as soon as the light stopped, the images would stop forming, and you would have this image that the light burned into it, and then you would go put it into a different chemical to lock it in permanently. Okay, so that was film. Now what would happen is this image would run by a light reticle, so light would come in, and it would come in 24 times a second. So 24 times a second, it would shoot light on it, and then it would just move the image down, shoot light on it, move the image down, shoot light on it, move the image down. Now what's really funny is we're going to get into really deep math, and these little blocks and squares are kind of the fundamental basis for the stuff we do today, even with digital stuff. So what I'm going to show you is a lot of these concepts just are burned into what we do for video. They're there all the way till today. So keep in mind this initial idea that you have these boxes running down 24 times a second. So that's 24 frames per second. So when an entire image is captured, we call that a frame. Okay. Now, let's go forward 50 years. So 50 years later, they decided we should figure out a way to transmit this other than these big heavy reels. These reels were really heavy. If you did a whole 2-hour movie, you had these ginormous reels you had to like move on a truck into a projectionist booth, and then the reel would spool out this content, but it was limited. You couldn't do this in your home. You had to have a lot of work to make this. And then since these were made out of nitrate and acetate, which is basically gasoline, there was a lot of times where the heat projecting through this would like ignite and the whole theater would burn down. It was like very common that early theaters didn't have a short lifespan. They eventually would burn down. Later on, they were made all out of metal. So if you go up to the projectionist booth, it would be all metal with like vents to blow down stuff to stop the fire. And it was just very dangerous, crazy thing that people did it. But people wanted to see moving images so badly, they were willing to take the chance and do this. So they said, let's do this where we transmit this. So what they decided for the next step was they would take a tube. Let's just call it a tube for now. And this tube would get light from a studio, and it would turn light into an oscillation. So let's say here's a studio. Here's this camera, the original TV camera. Now we're only doing luminance now. Luminance, no chrominance, just luminance. So brightness is coming in, it's black and white. So we have luminance coming in, and this tube would translate light into a wavelength, an oscillating wavelength, continually changing wavelength. So if you imagine the light coming in has a certain amount of pixels, right? And as the pixels hit, if there's light, you get one wavelength, and if there's no light, you get a different wavelength. So you get sort of a wavelength for each pixel coming in, and then you get a set of wavelengths for the entire set of pixels. Now, this is a tube, so it's analog. There's no real pixels. It's a tube. And the tube takes this wavelength, and it's able to send this wavelength to a device that has a similar tube that can broadcast brightness onto a screen. So this is a TV in somebody's home, okay? So this wavelength gets sent over the air on a frequency that is, a spectrum that would be able to actually broadcast broadly and people can pick up. So this wavelength goes over a limited frequency. So let's say I'm channel 1 in Palo Alto. Channel 1 in Palo Alto is given a certain frequency. Let's say that it's like 660 megahertz or something. I'm not exactly sure the channel megahertz. So you send over this wavelength range, you're allowed to send a certain amount of waves you can jam into this frequency range. So it would be like, let's say it's like 660 megahertz to 680 megahertz is the range that we'll call channel 1. So this receiver is listening to 660 to 680. It's looking for any wavelength that are in 660 to 680, and we're jamming as many wavelengths as we can to represent this light being transferred into waveforms, okay? So the waveforms are being pushed down to this thing, and then this thing is reading the waveforms and going, oh, okay, based on how you're oscillating, I will then send a certain amount of brightness, and I'm going to do it in order. I'm going to go this pixel, that pixel, that pixel, that pixel. I'm going to skip a line. I'm going to go that pixel, that pixel, that pixel. I'm going to skip a line. I'm going to go that pixel, that pixel, that pixel. So this thing is listening to these wavelengths, these waveforms. Actually, waveform is a much better. It's an oscillating waveform. right? Because it's changing over time. Okay, so an oscillating waveform is being sent over a certain frequency range. This thing is receiving it, sending that waveform into a tube, and the tube is then sending a certain amount of brightness or darkness. It's a flashlight, basically. It's a light, and it's sending light onto a screen that glows. It's like a glowy screen. So the screen retains a little bit of glow. Okay. So this light is hitting the screen, and it's drawing across the screen, skipping a line, drawing across the screen, skipping a line, drawing across the screen. It is doing this 59.94 times a second, and when you skip a line, we call that a field. So this is 59.94 fields per second. Now, doesn't that seem like there's a hole here? Like we're drawing every other line, and so we draw, the top lines really quickly in 1/59th of a second, and then we draw the other set of lines at 1/59th of a second. So that seems like, well, we've got a hole. We didn't draw the whole thing. Like this made sense. This is a whole image, but over here we're only drawing half the lines. Can you get other than the graduate student? Can you guys tell me how does this work? How does this not have a problem where there's holes on the TV? I gave you a hint earlier on in describing what the screen was like.
What to do with it like retains a little bit of light, so if you kind of like alternate between the two.
Exactly. So it's glowy. The screen like hits the light hits the screen, but the glass has a little bit of a chemical that sort of maintains this glowiness on the screen. So the screen will hold a little bit of a glow from this line by the time this line comes along. So this line gets drawn, it's on the screen, it's kind of glowing, and then this line comes along and fills in the hole, and together it looks like one complete perfect image. Okay, so the first important concept that's going to carry with us all the way through is things run at different speeds, and the speeds can be converted. Fields can be converted to frames. Frames can be between 24 to 29. This is a fundamental thing that stays with us today. Okay. And the other part that we're going to spend a ton of time on is what happens with these waveforms. So this initial early implementation was really simple. You basically had this tube, it would kind of oscillate. The oscillate would get turned into, this oscillation is going up and down like this. It's very easy to turn that into a waveform and then send that through a radio, through a frequency. And then if the frequency is deep enough, then it'll send it, the frequency will send it out in a very large, frequencies go from a base outwards, kind of like this, right? They kind of have to, they kind of cover more space as they get farther out. And so to have something where everybody all over a city can receive it, you have to have a pretty wide frequency. If your frequency is kind of small, short, like these high frequency numbers, like on next generation cellular, they're kind of like this, and so they don't spread out well. If you're in a whole city and everybody's trying to listen to this high frequency thing, you won't get, buildings will get in the way, a building will cut it, and you won't be able to get it. So there was only a certain frequency spectrum that really worked for TV. And, but they got the whole end-to-end thing working out. It's like, okay, you only had to have one tower in a whole city, everybody in the city can get that frequency. It's such a large frequency that if a building is in the middle of it, it's okay, it's bigger than the building. The frequency that comes to hit your antenna is really big, bigger than anything that was blocking it in the way. So if you get parts of it, you get enough to be able to reconstruct the frequency. Okay, so frequencies, frame sizes. Frequencies and frame sizes. Are you ready for the change to digital? We're going to go to digital now. We were in the 60s. We were stuck in the 60s. Let's go to digital TV. Okay, so we went from sending these waveforms over frequencies to bits. We just jumped to bits. Okay, so now let's rework our studio. Okay, we're modern now. We're going to go to bits. Now, we still have to send this over a frequency, right? So, okay, I've got a better camera, just like that camera. So that camera has the technology pretty close to what was used in the first digital ones. Digital cameras basically took the light in and they split it on a prism, and they split it to 3 receivers of each color. So it'd be R, G, and B receivers, or YUV, depending on what you're doing. And so the light comes in from the studio, and here I am on a modern camera. Light comes into a prism, it gets split into its component colors. The colors each go to a certain diode that will receive that, and that diode can digitize the color and actually now has the notion of pixels and knows that there's like a certain frame size. So they each know, okay, we've got a, and we went, let's go to 1080, let's say. 1080 was sort of the first digital, so I have a 1080 image that each of us are drawing. Okay. So light's coming in, we're each getting the colors, and we each have a 1080 image in red, a 1080 image in blue, and a 1080 image in green.
What do you mean by 1080 image?
Oh, that's the pixel size. So here's the human. I'm bringing in data and I realize, oh, I need to draw 1080 pixels. So it's 1920, great question, thank you, by 1080 rectangle. So I have a 1920 by 1080 rectangle that I'm trying to draw in modern digital TV, okay? HD, we call this, HD is the name for that size. Okay, I'm gonna jump ahead then jump back. So we have a problem, we have tons of data, it's all digital, but we have these wavelengths, we're still trying to send things over. So what are we gonna do? Well, we're still stuck with wavelengths. We have to do something along wavelengths, but wavelengths turn out to be amazingly efficient. Wavelengths are waveforms, and specifically sine and cosine. Sine and cosine end up being the most efficient way to store data that's changing all the time, and for multiple pixels. Now let me show you why cosine and sine are so amazing. Now we're to the sine and cosine stuff. This is where I get really excited. It's really fun. Okay. A sine, let's say here's your sine. Let's do a sine waveform. Okay. So here's like a sine waveform. And let's say that I just overlap it with like cosine waveform. Okay, so I've just taken two sets of data, sine, cosine. Okay. Now, if you are being sent these, if I'm sending you these waveforms, these sines, if I'm going to send you these, do you need, let's say I've got, this will be like data set A, this is data set B. I'm going to give you every point, A, all the way through. So you're going to get A sub 1, A sub 2, A sub 3, A sub 4, A sub 5. Down here, I'm going to give you B sub 1. I'm not going to give you B sub 2. I'm going to, there's some noise in the air. There's some kind of problem. I'm going to give you B sub 3, B sub 4, B sub 5. All right, so I had a little bit of problem with my transmission. I couldn't send you B sub 2. With these data points, can you construct B sub 2? Knowing B sub 1, B sub 3, B sub 4, B sub 5, knowing this waveform, knowing that this is a cosine of a certain, like this is probably like y equals cosine x. So y equals cosine x. You've got all the data points except one. Doesn't seem to be changing. Seems like it's y equals cosine x. Do you need that data point? No, you don't need that data point. And in fact, didn't I already send you that data point? Because look, it overlapped with that a sub 2. So you actually have a data point to fill in that spot. And if this is actually the data set, I would normally not even need to send you this unless I was being very literal and saying, oh, I'm going to send you a sub 2 and I'm going to send you b sub 2. They're the exact same data point. If you only wanted distinct data points, you wouldn't even want them to send you this. So a really efficient algorithm would go, oh, I'm not going to send you everywhere that there is an overlap. I'm only going to send you the ones that don't have an overlap. So if I gave you this data set with a hole at b sub 2, a hole at b sub 4, and a hole at b sub 6, and I gave you a 2, 3, 4, 5, and I told you this is your full data set, you could construct these two cosines, right? Okay, so that is really efficient, that a cosine has an expected behavior, and it can overlap with other waveforms, and you can get the data out of these waveforms. What does this look an awful lot like? What does this look like? Remember our diagram from 5 minutes ago? What were we doing in our diagram from 5 minutes ago? We had a tube and it was oscillating, right? So we had this oscillating tube going dark, bright, whatever. So I had this oscillating tube, it was sending a signal, the whole infrastructure was sent to send that signal. We had decided channel 1 is this much waveform, channel 2 is this much waveform. And so as people started developing more complex ways to send data, to try to jam more data in the analog space, they started to realize, oh, if we express these things as cosines and sines, we have a really efficient way to send data still over a wavelength. So I can send, this is a wavelength. And so a Fourier transform, the first interesting thing, a Fourier transform is actually taking a cosine representation of a data point. If I tell the other side, hey, I want to give you 1, this is 0, this is 1, I want to give you 1. Well, I'm going to actually send you this waveform. And this waveform is going to kind of pop where the 1 should be, but it is a waveform, so it will go up and it'll go down, and any waveform function is going to have this overlap. But if your sensitivity is here, so consider it a value when it lands in here and ignore everything else. So I can still use this same idea of sending things over frequencies, right? But you can get a digital piece of data out of that frequency. This was the huge jump that is the fundamental basis of all encoding, is that I can take waveforms and sines, things that are very efficient, and I can get digital data out of the sines. Since I can use sines, I can use all of these calculations with, like, I can use, cosine sine math to get backwards to bits very easily, right? Cosines and sines work very easily backwards to bits. If you have this, threshold, oh, okay, as soon as the sine goes over this value, it's 1. This basic concept is that bits can be represented as sine and cosine forms, okay? Now, so you don't have to understand the math here, you just have to understand the idea that we start off with these, we have a wavelength we're sending stuff over, we have a frequency we're sending stuff over, and we were sending wavelengths, and we're comfortable with that, and we discovered that we can overlap them in a mathematical way, not just randomly, but as actual functions. If they're actual functions, then they're predictable, we know what the next values are. So we can start to reduce our data set, we can start to reduce the amount of information we descend, and we can get really high value data sets on the other side using this mechanism that is really similar to what we were doing before with a single luminance, thing oscillating, okay? Now, let's do this for a bunch of pixels. Let's do this for 1,000 pixels, right? Let's do this for a whole frame of pixels. This is a 2K amount of pixels, right? So you can overlap all of these sine functions, and you'll have to trust me, it is quite easy to unwind all of this overlapping sine and cosine functions. And that unwinding is called a discrete cosine transform. So to take a whole bunch of overlapping data sets and to turn them back into actual data is called a discrete cosine transform. We're going to transform all these cosines back to data. So if I start off with pixel 1 is that. Pixel 2, it's a little more blue. Pixel 3, a little more blue. Pixel 4, it's a little less. Okay, so let's say I'm drawing this screen. I've got a bunch of pixel representations. I put them into sines and cosines. I send them across a wavelength medium, frequency, and at the other side, I can use a discrete cosine transform to pull out all the discrete cosines that I have over time. So remember, this is one moment in time, right? So in this graph, let's kind of simplify it greatly and say we start with a little bit of red. Okay, it's a little less red, more red, more red, more red, less red, less red, more red, more red, less red. So here's my values going from, 1 to 2 to 3, and back down to 2 to 1. And so I can take the cosine representation of this data, send it as a cosine, and then take it out of the mass of other cosines I'm sending, and then get the discrete data set that then ends up being what I'm supposed to draw in that pixel. The Fourier is the low-level concept that these waves can be turning into bits, but globbing all the cosines together and be able to get data back out of that, that's the high level DCT, that's the high concept. You'll hear DCT used a lot, probably, if people are talking about how is this transform occurring. So, okay, that's the fun math part about encoding. Let's talk about a much more easier to grasp concept for encoding that we use every single day, group of pictures. So the first efficiency they came up with was the idea that if a guy is like, or some person, a neutral gender person is running, okay, then this is how, let's say this is how it would look. And they got their hand up and their hand back, and now they've got a foot that way and a foot that way. And now they're going like this, and now maybe both their feet are this way. And now maybe, this person might be flying. Like when a horse runs, isn't there a point when all the feet are in the air? So, okay, so here I am running. Right. And so as I'm running, you are going to show this at 24 frames a second. So this is going to be, let's say this is 24 frames. Actually, let's be TV style. TV style would be then 59.94 frames. Anybody know why it's not 60, by the way? Like, isn't it 60 frames? Everybody talks about 60 frames. Why do I keep saying 59.94? I'm so stickler about this 59.94. We're kind of just round it up to 60. Anybody know why it would be 59.94? Talk about TV style. Okay, I'll tell you why. So all of this started off with these tubes that were just drawing as fast as they could. They didn't draw at a frame rate of 60. They just drew as fast as they could. And so the tubes would generally hit 59.94. They just couldn't exactly hit 60 because they're not digital. They're analog. There's like gas in them, little metal things, the metal would wear down. They just couldn't exactly hit 60. They could hit 59.94. So the hertz, the megahertz they operated at ended up being 59.94 frames. But you couldn't make the megahertz of the, putting power in a little tube, you couldn't get it to be exactly 60. So only this is a modern concept that you do things at exact intervals of 60. That's a modern concept. But all TV is still in this old style. They also do support 60. So some stuff will come in at 59.94, some stuff will come in 60. So when they finally went to digital, they kind of opened it up and said, okay, well, we'll use all the old formats, but we'll also add some new ones. But almost everything you get on TV is this style. The cameras are this style. They still really haven't gone fully like 60. You don't see that a lot. Only in our phones and our DSLR cameras are you at full numbers, right? Because there was no broadcast history in that DSLR camera. It's just from the ground up, they just made it. But so much stuff is this way. Okay, so let's be modern. We just jumped to the modern age, and we're going to do 60 frames per second. And at 60 frames per second, here's a frame, here's a frame, here's a frame, here's a frame. And so we are trying to represent this person running, and I'm going to do 4 frames in a row. Now in the old style, I would draw every single pixel of this person running. Do you notice anything similar across these frames of this person running? The head is the same. So we don't need to send that head 4 times in a row. Let's just get rid of the head. We don't need the head. So now, how efficient did I just make this? I'm going to send you this picture to start, and then I'm just going to show you these little arm changes. Also, don't I have some torsos that are kind of similar?
Yeah.
I don't need to send those either. I don't need to send that torso. I don't need to send that torso. I don't need to send that torso. Okay. So this is the first concept of simplifying video over time, where we don't need to send you every single pixel. That was an old style. We're now modern. We've realized we can be even more efficient. We don't need to send you every pixel. We're going to only send you pixels that change. So when you send a full image to start, you call that an iframe. It's just I don't even know what the I stands for. It's full frame. It's a full frame. So I got to draw every single pixel the first time. That is the most inefficient frame you're going to do all day. That's every single pixel. So if it's a 1920 by 1080 frame, it's literally 2K of information. Times 4, because remember you had 4 bits. So it's pretty inefficient. Then I'm going to only send you these things that change. And so now these are one of 2 optimization types, which is called either a B or a P. I'll say what those are in a second. And so now I have been unbelievably efficient in sending you just the things that changed off of this source. And the B means by prediction, meaning you can kind of look either way. So if you can see this B is drawing this information from that iframe, but also this other frame down there in the future. Okay, now I'm blowing your mind. This is actually needs the future to occur for it to be drawn. That makes sense? So this guy uses information from the future. And he also uses information from the past to draw himself. Same thing here. This guy is predictive off of here. So he only tells you the delta from I. So a P frame, these are essentially P frames. I'm just going to tell you the difference from I. So if I have a P plus an I can draw that whole frame because I'll just fill in what I got from the I. Okay, that's a P.
So timeline-wise, the iframe comes first, then P.
And it has to
then
come
B.
first. Well, so an iframe has to come first. That's the only rule. The only rule is the iframe has to come first. Then any frame can come after it, either a B or a P.
But how does a B know a P? Because B is dependent on...
Such a good question. Okay, so now how do we start assembling these things? Now we're into the core decision-making of encoders. Our encoders make these decisions every day. Our FFmpeg library makes this decision every day. Now, I started with the I didn't really end this, did I? I just kind of kept going. Now you'll notice in our diagram, it actually ends with another I. When would you think I would give up on the schema and just start all over again and get all the information? What would happen that would make me want to give up and just start with a whole new set of information? What has to happen in the image?
Change the scene?
Yeah, there's enough of a change in scene. Exactly, that's exactly it. There's enough change in the image that this algorithm breaks down. If all of a sudden now it cuts to a shot of like 2 people standing there, okay, well, none of this is going to work now. So I've got to start all over and mint a new I. Okay? So this whole schema breaks down as soon as you have too much change. So our encoders will actually analyze the content and they'll look and say, okay, what's here? Oh, I've got a person running and it's all pretty much similar to there. Then I have a brand new thing. So it'll identify a scene change itself, the encoder. And then it'll say, okay, now what do I have to work with? Okay, I've got a couple of legs moving. Okay, you know what? I can probably do a P and then a B and then a P. Some really simple ones will actually have a set up where it's like, oh, it's going to be I, P, P, B, P, P, B. Some encoders are really simplistic and won't do a good job calculating all these. They'll just have kind of a method they follow, a formula they follow. And some are really good about just, like, oh, what's the best? Okay, I'll analyze and I'll figure out. It takes time to analyze the frames to do an optimal GOP construction, right? So if you're kind of on a low CPU device in the old days and you don't really have all the CPU to do a good calculation of choices and what should be the best, then you would kind of follow a formula. But now we're getting much better. We're getting much better at constructing this GOP. Okay, we gotta talk about how long this GOP is. Oh, there's a question in the front.
So,
Floyd.
what's the difference between B and P again?
So B is bipredictional, right? It's both, it looks at data on both sides of it, and P is just going forward, like I build on the previous frame. So if the changes were like this much changed, and then only, the next thing is only like that changed, and that builds directly on that, then that's really suitable for another P frame, right? Because it's like, oh, I moved my arm, oh, I only moved it a little bit, and look, you can keep sending less and less data as long as the change is less and less. As soon as the change starts being bigger and bigger, this kind of breaks down a little bit. And eventually it becomes so big, it fully breaks down and you go to a full iframe.
So does the encoder tag the frame by itself, or is that the information received from the sender side?
So now remember, we're encoding this before we send it down the pipeline.
I see.
So before we send it down the pipeline, we're gonna look at the raw data, and we're gonna go, okay, it came off the camera, I've got raw data, let's go and figure out how can I represent this data in a more efficient manner? And so I'm gonna go, oh, look at that. Everything else is the same except for that. Oh, there we go. And then you might have a thing where like, oh, this arm over here and the head over here are exactly used in this one right here. So you know what, I'm gonna do a B frame that goes and says, oh, grab that guy's head and that guy's arm and that becomes here. So that's like the Frankenstein frame. We'll go find the pieces we have that match. But the encoder has the full set up until the next scene change. Or are you ready for the inefficiency? This is going to kill you guys. We were enjoying this compression algorithm so much, right? It was so efficient. We were enjoying it so much, but it can't go on forever. What if the guy's running for like 20 minutes? Like we eventually have to end this at some point. The party has to come to an end. So either the party comes to an end when there's sufficient change in the scene, or you've decided your system can only handle such a large package, and so you have to just stop. Like I can't handle a bigger package than a 2-second GOP. That is like an industry standard. So you either go to the end of the scene or 2 seconds, whichever one is shorter. Okay.
That's like a fixed 2 seconds.
You just decide, it's been 2 seconds, that's too many frames, stop giving me frames. And that 2-second window is important at the player. You can't start playing until you have the full 2 seconds. Like, let's say you get this B frame. Well, what if the B frame, the B frame needs this and this? I'm gonna have to get all the way to the end of this GOP before I can construct it. So no player will start playing until it's got a full GOP. And many players want to have multiple GOPs because you have a problem with buffer underrun and overrun. If you are trying to play your GOPs as fast as possible, you don't want to just have only the current GOP, and then what if you get right to the end of it and the next GOP doesn't come in? So you generally want to have a couple of GOPs queued up at the player. So the longer this is, the harder it is for players to queue up the data they need to start playing. This is a thing we call time to first frame. We want to start playing as soon as we can, but we do need the full GOP, and we generally need more than one GOP so that we're kind of safely queued up so that our flow control algorithms work correctly. Right? At the same time this is happening, we have the flow control over a limited network, and the network's killing us, and we're continually trying to get the best sized GOP and get them as quickly as possible, do retries if there's any retries. So we have a whole network layer down here just trying to get these frames as quickly as possible. So the size of this makes this guy's job really hard. If this guy starts having at the studios, there was a lot of 7-second GOPs because they love the efficiency of this. Make the GOP really big, make it be like 7 seconds. Then it could be really efficient because you have this big long window, and what if the person's just doing the same thing for 7 seconds? Oh, it's so efficient. But then anybody trying to send content with a 7-second GOP was like, oh my gosh, I have to load 7 seconds of content for the first GOP. I gotta load another 7 seconds of content for the next GOP. And like the Apple player has to have at least 2 GOPs, I believe. Like a lot of players just, you write them to store up GOPs. Nobody really goes with 1 GOP. That's like madness, right? So big long GOPs doesn't make sense for players. Also, it's really hard for flow control. Also, it's really hard for the CPU when we encode trying to look at all the content. Imagine if the CPU is looking at 7 seconds of frames and it's trying to figure out where the B's and the P's are. That's a really difficult, complex problem with a ton of CPU required to do that. Whereas if you're looking at a 2-second window, it becomes easier. And some people also use a 1 second. So there's a 2-second window is very common. We use a 2-second window. And then a 1-second window is also common for where they have really bad encoders that can't even handle 2 seconds, and also where they want to really quickly playback. So they'll just send a 1-second GOP down, and then imagine if this guy's waiting for 2 seconds for 1 GOP, but I can get 2 1-second GOPs in the same time. I will play much faster than this guy will play time to first frame. So some people that care about time to first frame will go ahead and optimize down for 1 second GOPS. We go to 2 second GOPS. In the world of DAT, now we're going to jump way to a different optimization. A different optimization is that this, we all consider this to be one bit rate, right? We're basically doing one set of stream of content for it. So let's say this is an 8 megabit per second stream. So I'm doing all this work for an 8 megabit per second stream. It's gorgeous. Well, what if I want to do both then a 5 megabit and a 2 megabit and a 1 megabit? And I want you to choose which one is best for you. That's called dash. Dash is an approach where you tell the client, hey, there's a bunch of different movies, not just one. And these different movies are at different bit rates, okay? And if these different movies are different bit rates, you're now going to be switching back and forth as the movie is playing. You're going to go, oh, my network got bad. I better stop watching that movie and start watching this movie. Same movie, just it's a different bit rate. Well, if these all line up nicely, exactly 2 second GOPS, it makes everyone's life easier. It's like, oh, okay, every 2 seconds, I'll go check for my bit rate. If my bit rate's lower, I'll ask for the next 2 seconds. Then 2 seconds later, I'll check again. But if your GOPS are kind of like all over the place, like, oh, I have like a 1 second GOP and a 0.5 and a 2, then you can't do really simple counting. You can't be like, oh, I have one buffered, I'm waiting for the next one. If they start all of a sudden coming in short, you know, you're like, oh, well, I think I set so short little GOP. So having shorter little GOPS is a little more complexity for all the flow control stuff. So that's iframes, and that's the 2 second GOP. That's like a fundamental thing you'll see everywhere. And so if you see someone changing GOP, you know they're doing something. Like, oh, I see this syntax, this FFmpeg syntax. Oh, in the syntax they're doing 1 second GOPS. Okay, and there might be a different use case, like Portal might have a different GOP because they control both sides, end to end. And maybe they even know, like, oh, maybe I have 2 second GOPS for bad network, but maybe when it's a really good network, I give you a whole different encode. That's a possibility. So it's something you can play around with, but it affects every single part of the stack, the player, network transmission, the ability to encode it. Those are all important.
Does live usually also use like a 1 second?
You still have to use GOPS. And actually everything kind of uses 2 second GOPS, even live. Yeah, because you still have, even if live, you're trying to send it as fast as possible live, you still have the basic fundamentals of the, you know, calculating the DCT, jamming, trying to figure out which frames you don't need to send. So you use the exact same mechanism for live. You just try to do it as fast as you possibly can. Let's talk about the math now. So I've convinced you guys that 1 second GOPS are like crime against nature. We're making so many iframes with all the data, right? Let's compare that to a 2 second GOP. In a 2 second GOP, I certainly have, or I could have, half as many iframes, right? In the 1 second GOP, I'm gonna go, let's draw it really cleanly. Okay. Okay, so this is the 2 second, sorry. And here's the 1 second, right in the middle of this thing. Okay, at a 1 second GOP, I have to do an iframe here and here, and then the next 1 second has occurred, right? It's been a second, ended, iframe, new GOP. It's been a second, ended, iframe, new GOP. In the 2 second GOP, I might get away with one iframe, and it's the same shot, and then end it with one iframe. Okay? So if we compare from here to, let's not compare that, let's just go to the end of, you know, just before the final one. Here I have one iframe, here I have two. This is a full set of data. This one technically could have less data all the way through. So even though I'm trying to target, let's say they're both trying to be like a 1 megabit encode. So this is a 1 megabit encode, this is a 1 megabit encode. Oh, this is such a fun math problem. Oh my gosh, you're ready for this math problem. This is a 1 megabit encode. I'm trying to get 1 megabit per second in the pipeline, and this is 1 megabit encode. But this one is constrained by having all of these big full frames. So if I even visually draw it, here's like a full iframe. It fills it all the way up. Here's a full iframe. It fills it all the way up. But this guy has all these nice B and P frames. So his B is like that, and his P frame is like that, and his is like that. Okay? And this one fills it all the way up. How soon do I get to 1 megabit with this guy? Do I get to 1 megabit? Do I have more visual stuff growing here on the screen than this guy? Like, isn't this guy very little data because he's not forced to do this big iframe? But this guy's got this big, ginormous iframe right in the middle. And so no matter how efficient these are, he ate up a lot of his bits with that iframe that he didn't need. Does that make sense? Oh, I'm so glad. So what happens is, I'm trying, like, I make a 1 megabit encode because I think that's what his network can handle. So we have to, all the network optimization can't have random stuff. You have to like set a bit rate and stick with it. So here's my bit rate. So this guy eats up his bits, as we say. So now, when it comes to the rest of, let's say that this is how we're going along. He also does the exact same P, the exact same B, the exact same P, but he's got this huge fat iframe for no reason because he went to 1 second GOP. And then now we're going to try to do the rest of the encode. Well, this guy's out of bits. So now I'm going to be like, oh, I'm going to make a nice P here. I'm going to make a nice B. I'm going to make another nice B. I'm going to use some bits. It's going to look nice. This guy's out of bits. So he's got to be like, oh, well, okay, I'll do a little bit. Well, I'm kind of out of bits. I'll do a little bit. And so now what happened was this guy gets to put less bits into his content that matters. So he can't show a really good version of the person running. He's got to show a kind of bad version of the person running because he ran out of bits on his iframe. So when you eat up all these bits in an iframe, you get closer to your max bit rate. Right? This is the max bits I will let you send per second. If your bits are eaten up in iframes, you don't have bits for all the other frames. So you have to use less bits. You have to be lossy. You have to give up information. So the longer your GOP, the better it's going to look, and the bits are going to look good for the content, not for a pointless iframe. Now this guy's frame right here is going to look much better than that because this guy's frame right here is the full frame. But if this is truly following our algorithmic optimization, this frame will actually be the correct full frame. So I have more bits, but I might have identical, you might not be able to tell the difference because I did such a good job with my optimization of DMP frames. So it's really a pointless iframe. Let's talk about computational power. Okay, so now if I'm gonna render every single pixel, basically there's no computational power. I'm just taking I'm just reading and throwing on screen, reading and throwing on screen. I don't have to do any math. This requires no math. It literally drew every single pixel. I only have to do the DCT math. And the DCT math now is so common, like every device you buy will have a whole little section in its GPU that will do the DCT math, right? Like doing this DCT math is like, every device can do it fast. So there's no real cost about, oh, I had to do DCT math. Like every device you touch has this in it, it's so common. Calculating B's from P's, there might be some efficient algorithms in your chip. You might have a DSP chip, you might have the GPU, you might have a DSP, you might have an FPGA, you might have something that's good about calculating B's and P's, because this now is like 30 years old. This is now becoming a very well-known algorithm, and it's it's not very expensive. There's a company you have to pay called MPEG LA that you have to pay if you want to do this math, because they have they have all of this is patented. So this company gathered up all the patents from everybody who has patents here and said, okay, there are so many patents in this space, the Fourier guy, the DCT guy, the GOP guy, like all these guys, they all want some money. So they gathered up all the patents and they put it into a pool, a patent pool called the MPEG LA patent pool, MPEG licensing authority, whatever. And so you go to them and say, hi, I would like to do all of this math in a chip. They're like, okay, give me $1. And so every phone you buy, they spend some money to MPEG LA to put an efficient chip inside your phone to do this DCT math and the BNP type stuff, MPEG type decompression. But it still takes time for that chip to do the work. So that chip has to go and do work on these ones. It doesn't have to. It only has to do DCT math on this full frame one, right? So it is a lot less. Now, here's where it gets scary. Are you ready? I hope this is Halloween, so it's okay to scare you guys, okay? Now, here's where it gets scary. This thing I'm telling you about is around for so long, it is literally in every single device. That device, every single device has optimized libraries to do playback of MPEG content, okay? But it's also really old. H.264 is really old. It's like, I make a joke, we're like state of 2015, right? We're not state of the art. It's a very old algorithm. The world has actually moved on to H.265, okay? And we've actually started trying to do VP9, and then Google pioneered this thing called AV1. And these are all improvements on this base concept. So this base concept is going to be legit, and probably for as long as you live, is a very legit concept of not sending all the information you need, right? Not sending all the information you need is a brilliant idea. But they've added some things onto it, and I'll cover that in the next slide, actually. But these things, they're all like brand new algorithms, they have these interesting ideas, and there is no chip to help you with this. There is no chip to help you with VPN. There is no chip to help you with AV1 for sure. And so when you start doing these much more complicated things, let's call them complicated P frames and complicated B frames. Let's just use that term for now. If I was going to do complicated P and B frames, it is really expensive. It is really painful. And so when you send a really compressed VP9 stream to a phone, its CPU goes nuts. And you can actually see CPU drain on a phone if it's watching VP9. You can like start watching a VP9 and you can just watch your battery go because the CPU is working full time. You can look at your CPU and it's like 100%. Okay, so these things are really made efficient by built-in chips, it's really important that we're aware of that and know that. We can't just jump into AV1 because it'll drain battery and it's just nobody's ready for it. No things are ready. And the experience you had here, where your thing was snappy and it was fast and it could do playbacks, because that thing had decades to get used to this algorithm working correctly. This algorithm works amazingly well. This one is brand new and it's 100 times more inefficient than this encoding. This takes 100 times the CPU that this does to encode.